somewhat of a disciplinary political question here. The resistance to this, or the idea that we're empiricists, this is not aesthetics, it's politics, it's not poetics. The writing culture moment, looking back on it, I now see as an argument, a timid argument actually, for various experiments in the doing of research, ethnographic, anthropological research for the combining of politics and poetics, anthropology and aesthetics. Now, what I'll do today what I brought were, since moving to the University of California in 2005, I established the Center for Ethnography. What could that be? Could be anything, but the important thing at that time, I think, was to see this movement of the possibility for, the desire for, this post-writing culture, 1980s, post-90s, desire for the collaboration of anthropology and certain kinds of methodological practices that come out of arts of various sorts. This was one part of the center. And to examine the practices and methodologies of collaboration themselves. So, and I've been working in that since around 2004 to the present time in various capacities. So, rather than to talk to you further at this time about it freehand, I'm sorry I don't have images for you today, but I have 3 short papers, I think, which interconnect. And I can stop if I feel I'm getting too long at any point. But I thought I would, and I did circulate these papers, so my interlocutors here know about them, I hope. And therefore, that we'll have maybe something to discuss. So let me present these 3 short papers. In California, there was a consortium supported by the University of California on collaboratory ethnography. And we just finished a 3-year set of conferences and grants, and I was asked to speak, we had a keywords closing address conference, and I was asked to speak on ethnography and design. Design has been one of my key words. So I'll read you this short paper, another short paper. All it adds up to a fairly short paper. But, I mean, really, they're just arguments for. This one is called A Brief but Enthusiastic Case for Entangling Ethnographic Methods and Design Practices. Now, the essence of ethnography as a method has been working alone, among others. In order to survive now as a relevant method, anthropologists are having to learn to work more profoundly with others in the very precincts that they have defined so productively. The ethnographic project, for which a certain kind of evolved text based on a signature research practice and associated genre writing, which was all outlined by Writing Culture and raised for debate, is still the professional coin of the realm. In a kind of displacement of this work away from a hallowed genre form, alliances with specific design disciplines and practices, in my case specifically, recently and rather joyfully with theatrical designers. Design working styles act like a solvent on the more authoritative rules for doing ethnographic research. In collaboration, they insist on a different presentation of ethnographic expertise. At least in its studio workshop moments, presentation of design practice drives the graphy, the G-R-A-P-H-Y, out of ethno encourages the anthropologist, ringed in by her intimate relation to field notes, toward entirely different forms of representation. It reinstills the performative ideals of dialogism and polyphony, which were two key words of the writing culture period, that drove the genre's more experimental period, the 1980s through the end of the century, in the exploration of new forms of writing and expression out of the cumulative stuff of fieldwork. What's wonderful about fieldwork is its formlessness. You collect a lot of writing and you don't know at the time what you have. It's, as Marilyn Strasser said, this blessed surplus. I have found writing together with designer partners about projects that we have done together adjacent to or within ethnographically conceived research, both productive and difficult. A difference in style was caught elegantly in a remark by the stage designer Luke Cantarella, who wrote to me in getting our book project, which we're doing, back on track. He said, "We were realizing more and more how the writing styles of design and anthropology tend to be quite different. Design language is so often terse, slogany, and prescriptive, often what I perceive to be tongue-in-cheek, whereas legitimacy in anthropology seems to want to make more modest, inductive, descriptive, and nuanced language." Then I sort of say here, but I don't have it. See, for example, Luke's beautiful website as a visual, even tactile expression of our projects together. It's productiveencounters.com. In some way, self-sufficient, but also awaiting an ethnographic text. The art of theatrical stage design, I have found, has suited certain contemporary problems of constituting anthropological research very well, in making the spaces or mise en scène of research in the odd spaces from which it arises and which it traverses. The assemblage, for example, a popular conceptual aid in describing the multi-sided relational spaces of ethnographic research trajectories, is more effectively produced by design imagination and its forms than described cartographically, so to speak. And stage design, in the materiality of its methods and its immersion in spectacle and audience, is better than ethnography in performatively addressing the issues of what I like to call inner publics, granular receptions, and modes of participation that count increasingly in producing claims to anthropological knowledge of others. For me, this received performativity is what widespread disciplinary calls for public anthropology means for the latter's future practice of its emblematic research method. It allows for the practice of what I once called circumstantial activism, rather than requiring a public anthropology to merge with the programs and activities of actual social movements, which often become the subjects of ethnography. Contemporary ethnography, as it has evolved, has a strong theory interest in composition. One of the changes of the 1980s made ethnography more decidedly theoretical at the level of conceptual innovation in its largely descriptive rationale. It actually made anthropology ethnography. And here I contest Tim Ingold's famous influential provocation to the reverse, his articles. It's anthropology, forget about ethnography. The descriptive and the analytic key to the invention of attractive concepts became mutually grounded in the creation of distinctive or signature narrative. This is what I would call Clifford Geertz intensified and politicized. This language of the ethnographic with richer alternatives and inventions, whether in text or traveling as dialogue, is something that makes it different from design. as captured, I think, in Cantarella's observation, which needs a working concept, a way of thinking that allows one to perform or make. Ethnography is more inert in this regard and perhaps more patient with the slow coming to clarity of grounded ideas. Design, stage design at least, wants to immerse these ideas in makings that anticipate spectacle. Anthropology is more cautious, more nuanced, as Cantarella observes. When it comes to writing together, this is the productive, what I would say, ragged edge of collaboration. Not always wonderful, but the ragged edge of collaboration is often productive. Of course, wonderful ethnographies continue to be written and published as a product of a still vibrant research tradition in anthropology, but ethnography as a naming of that tradition is no longer, I argue, as viable a disciplinary research program without some blending with other research methods and programs. The meshing with design practices seems to be one developing in congenial partnership, that it's been developing self-consciously since the early to mid-2000s, and it's just now finding paradigmatic expression. If you look around, you see many books being produced as design anthropology, anthropology and design, etc. What the effect upon the long-established disciplinary ethnographic paradigm is not clear, but this is what makes it an interesting development. A certain amount of doubt and I call it raining on the parade of trending enthusiasms as for design since the early 2000s is always wise, but I personally see this value still into giving in to the enthusiasm for design. This particular statement was against, collegially, the statement of Lucy Suchman at this meeting. And she wrote a very famous article in 2011 saying, oh, this desire for design is a kind of another formative method in which to stick ethnography. Be careful, because design has all sorts of flaws in itself. But she wasn't thinking of artistic design. She was thinking, and design has many types, and she was thinking of the kind of design that dominates informational science, and it's very hot in Silicon Valley, et cetera, and she's an authority on that. And she's suspicious of anthropology taking on that, too much of that kind of design. Anyhow, career-making ethnographic research projects begin with the imaginary of producing the written ethnography in mind, genre possibilities of which were considerably expanding during and after the 1980s, but are increasingly refined and realized by working collaborations with and through other research traditions, design disciplines being the most congenial, valuable, and most importantly, available. But certainly these are not the only imaginable partners. Better to think of my argument more generally as a hybrid atmosphere or ground in which to expand the ethnographic research tradition in all sorts of ways that bypass the written outcome or account. The dissertation, which many of you are involved in, being conventionally the rough draft of a monograph, and the reinforcement of the ethos of the lonely field worker. In such a change in the form of ethnography to design, the defining theory interest of anthropology and how its content knowledge gets articulated are displaced somehow. So bringing ethnography close to design raises problems for other allied discourses central to anthropological expression, for example, the so-called ontological term, that have become ever more embedded in the ethnographic genre for itself. I see ethnography then leaning toward design as an evolution of anthropology itself, One that is, for various historic reasons, anthropology is slow to recognize or not yet ready to recognize. Design is a technology for managing ever more complex collaborations which ethnographic projects happen to be immersed in or choose to be immersed in beyond the kind that classically defined the ethnographic subject relation. These can involve prototyping or iterations as key interventions, but also can explore imaginaries of experience of a number of projects done together. Prototyping brings the field into the collaborative space of analytic relations and fieldwork, sometimes planned, sometimes unexpectedly. A sustained design project or a series of them create an assemblage of present and past work that follows and defies its ordinary logics in planned and unexpected ways. So it creates a site of sustained active representation, an atelier or assemblage of projects with all sorts of material traces and recordings that pose questions and challenges and get invaded in a variety of ways and extents that the sacred precincts of filled materials never do. Finally, I propose 3 developments in the signature anthropological research process known as ethnography since the turn of the century that might have made various practices under the label of design attractive. Whether these are good, not good, fashions, or serious developments is something we can debate. I fall on the very positive advocate side of the debate when the influence of design is specific, knowledgeable, material, and sustained. So 3 developments in this kind of work. One is the increasing collaborative condition of ethnographic research beyond the conditions of collaboration embedded in classic fieldwork. Design, I mean here my experience with theater design, offers dynamic modes and experiences of collaboration. 2, the increasing relevance of second-order observation, observing, and context as ways of doing concept work and performative writing in the field. How to imagine this process, dialogue, reading, performance, intervention, experiment. All these are good things. All these good things need their design spaces and systems of participation. The increasing relevance of writing at third as a process in the field. Writing as an intermediate form that returns perhaps to older discussions of the literate and the oral. The ethnographic text remains authoritative professionally, but after the 1980s, its reflexive forms have become Baroque, stylized. Design forces ethnography as dialogue or performance back into the field. Most interesting is writing within the field that emerges at unexpected moments and in evolving forms. This requires development of notions like inner publics or granular receptions for which design spaces and collaborations of different sorts provide opportunistically the medium. Not quite finished. What I wanted, I had 2 other short pieces. One I'm going to skip here for the sake of the third one because it's an illustration. I just wanted to say that I wrote an afterword to a book coming out with the University of Toronto, which is a graphic novel based on the work of 2 medical anthropologists, one in Egypt at the time of the revolution there, the Arab Spring, and the second of someone working in American hospitals. But what's fascinating for this and me, beyond the work itself, the outcome, the ethnography, is that it's being done as a graphic novel. And so in my afterword, which I will not read, I sort of write about that process, and that they don't sit down and draw things, but they have a kind of imaginary for their work, which they work with actual graphic artists to produce a pretty interesting work which combines two separate ethnographic projects in a single narrative. I just want to say graphic novels are a favored, for people who have, academics who have long experience in writing in long forms, novels, histories, monographs, etc. The graphic novel, if you go into a store, a graphic novel store, you'll see that there are a lot of academic works, particularly in the biographical genre and stuff, which are being written as graphic novels. So it's not the only one, but I was asked to write an afterwards, so I wrote a kind of paean to ethnography, transducing into graphic novels here. But I won't read that in lieu of reading an exemplar of my work with Luke and Christine and what I talked about in the first part. And then I'll open it for discussion. We've done, in this little atelier, this continuing collaboration with Luke and Christine, who are artists of scenic design. We did one in the World Trade Organization. And this is a third one called 214 Square Feet. As a current sustained collaboration with two artists that has spun off from our Center for Ethnography Opportunities, the three of us, Luke Cantarella, head of theater design at Pace University, Christine Hagel, anthropologist and artist, and myself, are writing a text in the form of a workbook or manual that concerns how projects that merge ethnographic design and participatory art methods produce interventions, or what we call productive encounters, in relation to ongoing ethnographic research projects at different stages of development. Our orientation is explicitly toward the ethnographic method, and our purpose is to rethink or performatively and theoretically expand with organized, relevant publics aspects of fieldwork projects that are brought to the workshop in different stages of development. A productive encounter is doing something different with fieldwork materials. This involves an interesting rethinking of fundamental methodological concepts and the differences between performance concepts in art and design and the same ideas deployed in anthropological ethnography. For example, Christine Hagel rethinks and expands the concept of immersion, central to the professional culture of method and anthropology, as amplification. Productive encounters have the potential to amplify existing dynamics, conversations, debates, phenomena. Nobody in the field responds to your immersion except in a very personal way that you write down in your field notes. But people will respond to amplification. So you get a kind of surplus. You get more surplus value. This runs counter to how classical anthropology works, in the sense that through immersion, one seeks to overhear and observe natural phenomena that occur in the course of everyday life. This tacit knowledge is unamplified and thus has been associated with a kind of sublime and gifted insight. Being an ethnographer has long been associated with a kind of sublime and gifted insight, but this can be opposed to the model for experiments such as we are designing as the Productive Encounters Workbook, which relies upon techniques to open up, share, and morph anthropological hunches or insights by creating expressions for them, not as true or false, but as situations where such ideas are explored or amplified directly or indirectly by social actors. The imaginaries of pioneer situational ethnographers like Irving Goffman and Harold Garfinkel posed ethnographic insight in these dramatistic terms, but we are breaking the frame of the bounded fieldwork concept and thinking more like, for instance, Bertolt Brecht, while keeping clear of the specific assumptions and aesthetics of theater craft. So far, we have workshopped 3 projects together. I present one briefly here entitled 214 Square Feet, created principally by Cantarell and Hegel and advised by me. The title refers to the living space of entire working poor families in rundown but high-priced motels situated in a very wealthy, very religious and politically conservative enclave of Orange County, south of Los Angeles, notable for the original Disneyland, many huge and wealthy churches, extravagant malls, and sterile corporate business parks. It is also where my university is, the University of California, Irvine. The concept of the project was not so much to examine the conditions of the virtually homeless, but to probe the relation or non-relation of the wealthy and the privileged, including us, enlightened academics, to them, and especially to stimulate and clarify ideas of charity, responsibility, and injustice. 214 square feet is an immersive, scenic environment created in collaboration with a charity, Project Hope Alliance, a nonprofit organization that serves the homeless population of Orange County. For such families, a motel room is an impermanent home made home-like through the personal objects that fill it and the daily activities of home life within its walls. The environment has traveled throughout Orange County, creating encounters at various non-traditional sites. This is sort of like multi-sited ethnography. At traditional sites of performance such as the Balboa Bay Yacht Club, the Central Plaza of my own university, the School of Social Sciences, and the Second Harvest Food Bank, and the Saddleback Church. Orange County is a place of immense wealthy churches. Existing on the border between theater practice and anthropology, 214 square feet is conceived as a research environment that collects ethnographic data through the activation of an experience. Fictional and personal narratives of homelessness in Orange County have been materialized in a staged environment, which in turn serves an ethnographic purpose by inviting audiences to experience this environment sensorially and to offer responses. The scenic environment is a full-size replication of a motel room inhabited and lived in by a fictional family of 6 who function as unseen characters. The audience entering the front door and exiting through the bathroom traverses the roughly 214 square feet. Furniture typically found in motel rooms has been arranged and augmented, showing the creative solutions to the practical problems of poverty and limited living space. Found objects purchased from auction at the goodwill of Orange County represent the personal effects of a composite family. Audio and video recordings emanate discreetly from objects such as a heat vent, a bedside alarm clock, and other objects, and intimate proximity is required to experience some of these media elements. For instance, only by sitting on the bed closest to the clock can one overhear a child's story. The experience overall is an open-ended participatory performance in which audience members open drawers, peek into storage bins, and otherwise touch and move objects as they walk through the space. In one respect, 214 square feet is in the tradition of participatory performance in contemporary art that Claire Bishop chronicles, especially strong since the 1990s. The project employed classic strategies from theatrical production to create a design space infused with embedded narrative. Hegel, an anthropologist, functioned as author by other means, substituting the text of the playwright with a body of ethnographic data. Cantarella, whose practice is set design, enacted a traditional design process that read the ethnographic data as a plain text, and from this reading generated a theoretical setting. 214 square feet adopted familiar strategies of the tradition of the site-specific art tradition, but it added to them a strategic dimension of temporality as well as multi-sited circulation, similar to the emergence of multi-sited fieldwork that so transformed the look and structure of ethnography from the 1990s forward. The 214 square foot project is most ethnographic in these strategies of movement and elicitation among related but diversely positioned subjects, not the working poor themselves, but the privileged of varying position, of whom the former are of varying interest, reflection, and consciousness. The anthropological root of the project is about the spatial and conceptual subtleties of varying degrees of inequality among the privileged. I'm almost finished talk here. The initial site, the Balboa Yacht Club, not only transposed one of the poorest hotel rooms in Orange County into one of the most exclusive hotels, but it also occurred during the specific time of a gala event. Attendees encountered the materialized performance within the specific context of a benefit and thus had to synthesize visual, spatial, and temporal disjunctures. In this context, the subject of the work became the nature of the charitable act. So you could say that this was an ethnography of the concern of the haves for the have-nots, and of charity in a way, and how it functions to assuage guilt and assert social status while simultaneously creating intimacies across class and between patron and benefactor. A similar process occurred as the piece traveled to different sites throughout Orange County. At the same time, the terms and the subject of the staged encounter shifted. For instance, during the installation at Saddleback Church, a mega church with a congregation of over 20,000, the subject became how fundamentalist Christianity resolves its principles of ministering to the poor with its dominant political discourse of libertarianism. Then later, when installed in the Plaza of the Social Sciences at the University of California, the installation revealed how works of advocacy relying on emotion are problematic for social theorists and researchers. There was a general sense of embarrassment. Trained to operate within rational intellectual structures and a presumed left liberal political mentality. The multi-sided circulation of the project thus engaged fundamentalists, philanthropists, social climbers, social scientists, and self-regarding decent citizens who saw themselves as such. In fact, the performance experience is construed as extending beyond the time of the encounter into process and installation. For each installation, instead of hiring a strictly professional crew, volunteers were solicited among the different partner organizations to help assemble the structure. The process of installation was seen as a crucial time in which dialogue among the work's themes were rehearsed. Volunteers, having participated in the labor of building and restaging the environment, acquired a kind of ownership in it and often became guides for the viewing audiences. This was particularly notable during the performance of the Balboa Bay Club, where a member of the Project Hope Board, costumed in black tie, adopted the role of a narrator, guiding patrons through the motel room and instructing them to specific ways of seeing and interpreting. As in a traditional narrative performance, a definitive statement about meaning voiced through a figure of authority both assert that truth while inadvertently suggesting their inverse. A kind of ethnographically valuable language game emerges. This duality reflected a central question of the gala site, namely, does the charitable act spring from a desire to do good or a need to symbolically suffer to cleanse one's guilt as a member of the upper class? This, of course, is a question or an observation that arises in ethnographic participant observation, and perhaps explicitly in conversations of classic fieldwork. Here it is performed through the production of the installation in richly generative expressions and reflections by a kind of elicited and interested collaborative doing or making, as ethnography by design and performance. This project remains in prototype. We do not yet consider it to have docked in authority. We are not ready yet to write an academic paper on it or put it out as a book. It has no need to constitute the richest kind of analytic descriptive knowledge form that ethnographic method was invented to produce. So with the reading of that example, I'll stop and ask for conversation, question, whatever.